Legendary Passages, Episode 48, Amazons vs. Atlantis. Forgotten Legends from Diodorus Siculus, Library of History. Last time, Heracles explored North Africa and created the Pillars of Heracles during his labors. This time we examined local legends from before the Age of Heroes, focusing on the Amazons near Carthage and the peoples of the Atlas Mountains, dubbed Atlanteans. These Amazons lived on an island called Hespera, in the Tritonus Marsh in Tunisia or Algeria. That land was far more hospitable millennia ago, full of fruit trees and herds of animals. The women controlled the government and fought in wars, while the men stayed at home and raised the children. The Amazons founded a city named Chersonesus, ruled by the ambitious Queen Mirina. Seeking to expand their territories, they made war with the Atlantean city of Cirne. They sued for peace, so the Amazons next attacked the race of Gorgons, but failed to destroy them. Queen Mirina befriended the Egyptians, subdued Syria, and became something of a female Alexander the Great. Eventually Siculus the Scythian and Mopsus the Thracian killed Mirina and dispersed the Amazons, and their conquests are all but faded from history. The Amazons vs. Atlantis, a legendary passage, from Diodorus Siculus, Library of History, translated by C. H. Oldfather. But now that we have examined these matters, it will be fitting, in connection with the regions we have mentioned, to discuss the account which history records of the Amazons who were in Libya in ancient times. For the majority of mankind believe that the only Amazons were those who are reported to have dwelt in the neighborhood of the Thermodon River on the Pontus. But the truth is otherwise, since the Amazons of Libya were much earlier in point of time and accomplished notable deeds. Now we are not unaware that to many who read this account, the history of this people will appear to be a thing unheard of and entirely strange. For since the race of these Amazons disappeared entirely many generations before the Trojan War, whereas the women about the Thermodon River were in their full vigor a little before that time, it is not without reason that the later people, who are also better known, should have inherited the fame of the earlier, who are entirely unknown to most men because of the lapse of time. For our part, however, since we find that many early poets and historians, and not a few of the later ones as well, have made mention of them, we shall endeavor to recount their deeds in summary, following the account of Dionysus, who composed a narrative about the Argonauts and Dionysus, and also about many other things which took place in the most ancient of times. Now there have been in Libya a number of races of women who were warlike and greatly admired for their manly vigor. For instance, tradition tells us of the race of Gorgons, against whom, as the account is given, Perseus made war, a race distinguished for its valor, for the fact that it was the son of Zeus, the mightiest Greek of his day, who accomplished the campaign against these women, and that this was his greatest labor may be taken by any man as proof of both the preeminence and the power of the women we have mentioned. Furthermore, the manly prowess of those of whom we are now about to write presupposes an amazing preeminence when compared with the nature of the women of our day. We are told, namely, that there was once in the western parts of Libya, on the bounds of the inhabited world, a race which was ruled by women, and followed a manner of life unlike that which prevails among us. For it was the custom among them that the women should practice the arts of war, and be required to serve in the army for a fixed period, during which time they maintained their virginity. Then, when the years of their service in the field had expired, they went to the men for the procreation of children, but they kept in their hands the administration of the magistracies, and of all the affairs of state. The men, however, like our married men, spent their days about the house, carrying out the orders which were given them by their wives, and they took no part in military campaigns, or in office, or in the exercise of free citizenship in the affairs of the community, by virtue of which they might be presumptuous and rise up against the women. When their children were born, the babies were turned over to the men, who brought them up on milk and such cooked foods as were appropriate to the age of the infants. And if it happened that a girl was born, its breasts were seared that they might not develop at the time of maturity, for they thought that the breasts, as they stood out from the body, were no small hindrance in warfare, and in fact it is because they have been deprived of their breasts that they are called by the Greeks Amazons. As mythology relates, their home was on an island which, because it was in the west, was called Hespera, and it lay in the marsh Tritonus. This marsh was near the ocean which surrounds the earth, and received its name from a certain river Triton, which emptied into it. And this marsh was also near Ethiopia, and that mountain by the shore of the ocean, which is the highest of those in the vicinity, and impinges upon the ocean, and is called by the Greeks Atlas. The island mentioned above was of great size, and full of fruit-bearing trees of every kind, from which the natives secured their food. It contained a multitude of flocks and herds, namely of goats and sheep, which the possessors received milk and meat for their sustenance, but grain the nation used not at all, because the use of this fruit of the earth had not yet been discovered among them. Amazons, then, the account continues, being a race superior in valor and eager for war, first of all subdued all the cities on the island, except the one called Menai, which was considered to be sacred and was inhabited by Ethiopian ichthyophagy, and was also subject to great eruptions of fire, and possessed a multitude of the precious stones which the Greeks call anthrax, sardion, and smaragdos. And after this they subdued many of the neighboring Libyans and nomad tribes, and founded within the marsh Tritonus a great city, which they named Cheronisis, after its shape. Setting out from the city of Cheronisis, the account continues, the Amazons embarked upon great ventures, a longing having come over them to invade many part of the inhabited world. The first people against whom they advanced, according to the tale, was the Atlanteans, the most civilized men among the inhabitants of those regions, who dwelt in a prosperous country and possessed great cities. It was among them, we are told, that the mythology places the birth of the gods, in the regions which lie along the shore of the ocean, in this respect agreeing with those among the Greeks who relate legends, and about this we shall speak in detail a little later. Now the queen of the Amazons, Mirina, collected, it is said, an army of 30,000 foot soldiers and 3,000 cavalry, since they favored to an unusual degree the use of cavalry in their wars. For protective devices they used the skins of large snakes, since Libya contains such animals of incredible size, and for offensive weapons, swords and lances. They also used bows and arrows, with which they struck not only when facing the enemy, but also when in flight, by shooting backwards at their pursuers with good effect. Upon entering the land of the Atlanteans, they defeated in a pitched battle the inhabitants of the city of Cerna, as it is called, and making their way inside the walls, along the fleeing enemy, they got the city into their hands. And desiring to strike terror into the neighboring peoples, they treated the captives savagely, put to the sword the men from the youth upward, led into slavery the children and women, and razed the city. When the terrible fate of the inhabitants of Cerna became known among their fellow tribesmen, it is related that the Atlanteans, struck with terror, surrendered their cities on terms of capitulation, and announced that they would do whatever should be commanded them, and that the Queen Mirina, bearing herself honorably toward the Atlanteans, both established friendship with them, and founded a city to bear her name in place of the city which had been razed. And in it she settled both the captives and any native who so desired. Whereupon the Atlanteans presented her with magnificent presents, and by public decree voted to her notable honors, and she in return accepted their courtesy, and in addition promised that she would show kindness to their nation. And since the natives were often being warred upon by the Gorgons, as they were named, a folk which resided upon their borders, and in general had that people lying in wait to injure them, Mirina, they say, was asked by the Atlanteans to invade the land of the aforementioned Gorgons. But when the Gorgons drew up their forces to resist them, a mighty battle took place, in which the Amazons, gaining the upper hand, slew great numbers of their opponents, and took no fewer than 3,000 prisoners. And since the rest had fled for refuge into a certain wooded region, Mirina undertook to set fire to the timber, being eager to destroy the race utterly. But when she found that she was unable to succeed in her attempt, she retired to the borders of her country. Now as the Amazons, they go on to say, relaxed their watch during the night because of their success, the captive women, falling upon them and drawing the swords of those they thought were conquerors, slew many of them. In the end, however, the multitude poured in about them from every side, and the prisoners fought bravely, were butchered one and all. Mirina accorded a funeral to her fallen comrades on 3 pyres, and raised up 3 great heaps of earth as tombs, which are called to this day Amazon mounds. But the Gorgons, grown strong again in later days, were subdued a second time by Perseus, the son of Zeus, when Medusa was queen over them. And in the end they and the race of the Amazons were entirely destroyed by Heracles, when he visited the regions to the west, and set up his pillars in Libya, since he felt that it would be ill accord with his resolve to be the benefactor of the whole race of mankind, if he should suffer any nations to be under the rule of women. The story is also told that the marsh disappeared from sight in the course of an earthquake, when those parts of it which lay toward the ocean were torn asunder. As for Mirina, the account continues, she visited the larger part of Libya. In passing over into Egypt, she struck a treaty of friendship with Horus, the son of Isis, who was king of Egypt at that time. And then, after making war to the end upon the Arabians, and slaying many of them, she subdued Syria. But when the Sicilians came out with presents to meet her, and agreed to obey her commands, she left those free who yielded to her of their own free will. And for this reason, these are called to this day the Free Sicilians. She also conquered in war the races in the region of the Taurus, peoples of outstanding courage, and descended through greater Phrygia to the sea. And then she went over the land lying along the coast, and fixed the bounds of her campaign at the Caucasus River. And selecting in the territory which she had won by arms sites well suited for the founding of cities, she built a considerable number of them, and founded one which bore her own name. But the others she named after the women who held the important commands, such as Cime, Patana, and Priena. These, then, are the cities she settled along the sea, but others, and a larger number, she planted in the regions stretching towards the interior. She seized also some of the islands, and Lesbos in particular, on which she founded the city of Mytilene, which was named after her sister, who took part in the campaign. After that, while subduing some of the rest of the islands, she was caught up in a storm, and after she had offered up prayers for her safety to the Mother of the Gods, she was carried to one of the uninhabited islands. This island, in obedience to a vision which she beheld in her dreams, she made sacred to this goddess, and set up altars there, and offered magnificent sacrifices. She also gave it the name of Samothrace, which means, when translated into Greek, sacred island, although some historians say that it was formerly called Samos, and was then given the name of Samothrace by Thracians who at one time dwelt on it. However, after the Amazons had returned to the continent, the myth relates, the Mother of the Gods, well pleased with the island, settled on it certain other people, and also her own sons, who are known by the name of Corybantes. Who their father was is handed down in the rites as a matter not to be divulged, and she established the mysteries which are now celebrated on the island, and ordained by law that the sacred area should enjoy the right of sanctuary. In these times, they go on to say, Mopsus the Thracian, who had been exiled by Lycurgus, the king of the Thracians, invaded the land of the Amazons with an army composed of fellow exiles, and with Mopsus on the campaign was also Siculus the Scythian, who had likewise been exiled from that part of Scythia which borders upon Thrace. There was a pitched battle. Siculus and Mopsus gained the upper hand, and Mirina, the queen of the Amazons, and the larger part of the rest of her army were slain. In the course of the years, as the Thracians continued to be victorious in their battles, the surviving Amazons finally withdrew again into Libya. And such was the end, as the myth relates, of the campaign which the Amazons of Libya made.